question came up earlier about the role of education, and I know it's a tall ask. It's an international issue. I was at a conference 3 years ago, invited by Israel. Israel has got the second largest number of startups in the world, but Israel is running scared because they are not producing enough engineers to run the country. I worked for Intel Corporation for 10 years. Intel used to give out bursaries to postgraduate students to study PhD. They then had to move down to graduate level. Now they are in the school level. They are also not producing sufficient engineers. Internationally, we are losing about 12% engineers a year, when we should be growing by about 10%. These statistics are frightening. Now, what are we doing? That's a big question. And my talk is about when do we actually start with the innovation. A lovely quote that I like: the only way to predict the future is to have the power to shape the future. May sound simple enough, but let's just see. So, a little bit of my organization. It's running for 38 years and it's an NGO. It was started by a very passionate teacher who wanted to get children to do science. In the average classroom in the township, learners observe a teacher doing science. They have no passion. They do not feel the passion coming from the educator. That is a reality. And how can we address that? I just quickly want to point down to the bottom of the screen here. Is out of the Science and Technology white paper, which was released probably a few days ago. The key thing is that science and technology needs to accelerate inclusive economic growth, make the economy more competitive, and improve people's everyday lives. When we look at what's happening around us, can we now justify what we are doing? Are we improving lives, or are we widening the chasm? Prof. Bruton has pointed out, it may not be where we want, but it's where we are going. Somebody else may be taking control of us. And I mean, we may produce technology for the right reasons. We may think it's, to help us out. But how often lives are lost because of abuse, misuse, and things like that? Let's take the first computer, for example. The first computer was built during war. Internet was developed during war. We use the technologies initially for the wrong reasons, but that does not mean that we should stop pursuing these things. We should not stop innovation. I think the important thing is do it with an ethical mind. As scientists, we are taught about ethics in everything that we do. In all our research, we're taught to deal with ethics. And comes a stage in a scientist's life when they have to hand over their inventions and discoveries. And who do they hand it over to? Non-scientists, politicians, business leaders. They never went through scientific ethics clearance and stuff. They don't care. So this is the world we live in. So all I'm saying is, how best do we contain all these negative issues from some of the technologies, and how do we teach the most important generation, our kids? Because they are going to be driving the future technologies. If we want to shape this world, we got to start with our learners. And we start in the education system. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. It is not the end all and be all, but it is one of the key factors within the cycle. These three photographs tell us a story, a historical story. You've probably heard of this. The first one is a garage in Palo Alto, California. The second is of a family-run store, and the third is also of a family-run store, but there is something that interconnects them. The first photograph was the headquarters of Hewlett-Packard, and they turned out into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's a story behind that. The second, the photograph on the right-hand side may look something like our food lovers market. We know how it is, whether you're in Cape Town or Johannesburg or Pretoria, they have more or less the same look and feel. And it started off as a small family-run business. And the third photograph, bottom left, bottom right, notice the difference? Only the people have aged. Because that family-run business did not have structure. They simply made decisions on a daily basis, very emotive decisions. And that does not help growth in anything. Now, why are these important? Is if we want the first picture to be a reality, and even the second picture, our government has to create an enabling environment for that to happen. So we cannot sit as a country running as a mom and pop store, and we will make decisions depending on the weather, depending on the day. We cannot operate like, we've got to have a long-term vision clearly mapped out, because history shows us if we have a solid plan and we stick to it and we resource it, we will meet with success. So we have an important role to play as government. How? And we heard of comments earlier about them being inhibitive. The thing is, there is a role for government to play. Government cannot be the end all and be all, cannot employ 35% of the unemployed, but government can really utilize the skills around them to be able to create this environment. I spent 10 years at Intel Corporation and I've attended many international events. One of the tricks I've learned from these highly progressive countries is they use minimum effort to develop strategies as well as policies. And what they do, they invite private sector, because private sector has got deep pockets. Private sector will ensure they go to the end of the world to make sure that we have 100% policy document to put in front of you for discussion. And governments in those leading countries will simply sit and utilize that expertise. There's nothing wrong with that. You will use all the great minds that you're surrounded by, not just yours. So why not use that in a policy environment as well? So there are some things that we can learn from private sector. I'm not saying private sector must run these things, but invite them, because they will go and get the expertise that you need and help our government or any government. And I've seen it happen in many, many countries. Intel Corporation has got a team of 6 people sitting in the EU on a permanent basis as advisors, because they are at the cutting edge of technology. And any leading country wants to have those advisors at the beck and call. And they are just that, advisors. They are experts in the field. So we need to create this environment to be able to have that kind of, let's say, wealth, economic growth. Most importantly, inclusive economic growth. Our science, technology, and innovation has to create an enabling environment whereby policies are in place, and policies do dictate these things, and sometimes we don't really like them, sometimes we like them. Whatever the case is, let us work together for a brighter future for our learners. Top left, that photograph is very typical of the past. And on your right hand side, you have a young black female PhD who's doing cutting edge research. We want to see more of that happening. So our strategy has to focus on that. Within the Expo for Young Scientists, we have 2 major mandates. Besides expanding number of schools, we must ensure we have at least 60% of previously disadvantaged individuals participating in science and technology across the country. And we must have at least 50% female participation. Right now we're sitting at 57% female, 73% PDI. Now we have to make these bold steps, or that picture on the top left will not change. But I think we've seen, I've been around NSTF a number of years, and I've seen a huge change in the recipients that are coming up at the South 32 Awards and walking away. I'm very, very excited to see that. In our country and in many other countries, we have what is called a digital advantage. I mean, every one of us has a laptop, we have a smartphone. do we ever know what the learner on the other side or what the community on the other side feels like, who do not have access to that kind of technology? So bottom right of your screen, as Prof. Bruton mentioned, Shakespeare's classroom. In much of Africa and even in our country, we have classrooms that look like that. We also have classrooms that look like the one on the left-hand side, where learners have the greatest technologies at the beck and call. What are we doing about that digital advantage? Are we widening it, or are we doing everything possible to close that gap? South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient. I think it was in the top 3. The Gini coefficient is measuring the gap between the highest earners and the lowest earners. And we are highly guilty of that. So sometimes our technologies enrich the rich. It is driven by private sector companies. I'll touch on that a little later on. Exactly what do we want as a nation? Do we go with the flow and say, wow, that's really trendy, you know, let's just move with the fourth industrial revolution because it does this and does that. And we forget about the communities we live in. So let's ensure that the environment we're working in is not harmed. And the statistic quoted earlier, that our rate of consumption is equivalent to 3.6 times the Earth. I mean, the last time I read it was 2 times, and now I hear it's 3.6. I mean, I'm shocked. But that is the reality. Now, let's look at a reality check. We have these notions of artificial intelligence coming about. We've had points raised about jobs being lost. That's going to happen. Artificial intelligence is going to lock us out of our own homes. It's going to lock us in this building when there's a fire and somebody hacks into the building. It's going to happen. But the key thing is, do we allow it to happen? How far do we need it to go? There are ethical reasons behind what we need to do. So it is a reality. I'm really not commenting too much on that, but all I'm saying is, it's happening. How do we deal with it? Okay? There has to be human interface in everything we do. Otherwise, machines will do everything. You go to the bank, you don't need to speak to the manager to apply for a loan. You just type in answers to 5 questions. It's either accepted or rejected, and that's it. But we know it's not that simple. Okay? So how far do we allow that? We talk about the green ICT. Green ICT is quite a nice concept. And I know we had a research done a few years ago on how much of energy you can save by changing the type of computing that you use and things like that. So it's not all that simple. What happens with the old technology once it's right? That is more energy efficient. So what do I do with all this inefficient IT products? Do you know the amount of harmful material in your computer? Okay, for one, there's 24 karat gold in there. There's a lot of glass. Plasma technologists have to do there's a lot of chemicals in there because industrial chemical engineers have to mix the right amount of gold for the maximum amount of data communication and carrying a current. So it is highly toxic. So when we talk about green ICT and so on, how green are we really going with this? The picture on the bottom right, about 1 ton of carbon emission, it will 10 trees and it'll take 5 years to grow these trees and stuff. You know what? Here's a problem about excess carbon emission, and here's a solution of grow more trees. Here's the one thing that we really consider. To support those trees, you need 100,000 liters of water a year. We have an average of 10% water loss a year. So we got to get by with less water in each cycle. Do you know, at some stage, we are going to run out of water and we cannot refabricate water. Everything else around us can be refabricated. Your latest iPhone gets stolen, you can get a new one. Your iPad breaks, you can get a new one. And in Cape Town, we've experienced this problem of water. So whilst we're talking about consumption, bear in mind, you cannot fix it just by growing trees. What are the needs of society? Do we want the luscious green village on the right-hand side? Or 50 years later, we have a barren, desolate wasteland where everybody's absolutely brilliant. We can communicate telepathically. We don't have to commute to work. We don't commute anywhere, but we are wired up to each other. But we are living in a barren, desolate area. That's where we're heading with the type of consumption we have. Another key question is, are we addressing company shareholders' bottom line in what we are doing, where we are going? Why are we buying the latest and greatest technologies? Is it really what society needs? Or are we simply giving the Hewlett-Packards and the Mercedes-Benzes a better return on investment? Now, the late Steve Jobs was brilliant at one thing, at marketing. Steve Jobs was able to convince you that you needed an Apple product in every sector of your life. And I personally know some people who I won't say fall into the trap, but they love the products, right? Bottom line, they love the product. Now, there's a phenomenon that happens before an Apple product is released. There's a big PR hype about it, that only 200 products will be available on that day. And from the previous night, people camp outside the Apple store because they want to be owners of that first 200. So what does that tell you about that? Is that big companies will tell you what you need. Not what you actually need to survive, but what you should have. Is that really where we want to go? We want to be dictated to? So we need to ask ourselves these questions and at times slow down the pace at which we are moving, because we are leaving the majority of our country behind. We had comments earlier about the rural areas. That's the reality. We don't have services in some areas. How do we address those as a priority before taking the next step? While at the same time, innovation still has to go on. We don't maintain a system and not innovate. They have to coexist. Key thing is, how do we strike that balance? This is a terrain in South Africa. We have 35 regions where we are operating, and we have 26,000 schools in our country. We are only active in about 5,000 schools. That means we've got a lot of work to do to get science, technology, and innovation out into these schools. We support the whole of the SADC region, as well as a number of countries as far as Nigeria, Ghana on the West Africa side, and Kenya, Tanzania, East Africa. So all these African countries are yearning to be innovative or leaders. Africa as a continent is a consumption economy. It was highlighted earlier that we just import stuff in. There is a need for that. We've got first world universities in our country. We've got first world manufacturing capabilities. But do these two ever collaborate? Now in Germany, one of the leading engineering companies, they have a concept called the Berufsakademie. They lease out university time and space to industry. So when Mercedes-Benz wants to create the next greatest car or a concept within the car, they don't need to build their own lab. They go to a university and they partner. And then the results of that goes back into manufacturing. We've got two of the capabilities in this country. We simply get the blueprints from BMW, Mercedes, and all the other car manufacturers, and we just bang out the metals over here, from East London to Pretoria to Durban. I'm sure we are capable of much more than that. When are we going to tell one of these major companies, keep your blueprints, we think we can do something like that over here? What's impossible? We are manufacturing cars and exporting it elsewhere from the same leading companies. So we have the capabilities. Key thing is, why aren't we doing it? Do we have an enabling environment? Does government, I know we have representatives from DTI here, are they cutting the right kind of deals for tax breaks? That's how most multinational companies work. Make it worth the while, hire 10,000 people, you get a good tax break, and you get your products out there. I'm sure it's a little more complicated than that. We are focusing on a national initiative, and this simply means that the work that we do is actively supported by the Minister of Science and Technology, the Minister of Basic Education, and the Minister of Public Enterprises. There is no other initiative that is working at this level. So it's not easy, and we really need a lot of partners to come along with us for us to make that impact. At our current rate of expansion, it will take us 26 years to reach all the schools. We don't have the luxury of that time. This is what we do. We improve quality of education and not just quantity. We hire 180 university students who go into 180 schools and spend 20 days to mentor these learners and educators. We have scientists who share ideas on innovation. So we have 600 of the brightest kids in the country under one roof, and we invite 3 or 4 scientists to stimulate them. We don't know when the next Shuttleworth is going to come out of that group. And by the way, Mark Shuttleworth participated in Expo. He's been back twice and spoken to our learners. And there's another gentleman I will talk about briefly. Another important thing is what we do is we embed the 21st century skills among our participants. Our schooling system teaches us as individuals, and then you go into university as an individual, you get your degree. Then you go to a workplace and your manager says, here's your team, you got to work with them. Where did that come from? Who ever taught us to work with a team? So these are some of the challenges that our schooling system has. We try and address through our interventions. And the last one, in the past decade, Prof. Bruton has mentioned this as well, we've got bright kids in this country. Over the past decade, we've participated in a number of science fairs. On average is about 6 or 7 a year. We won over 50 awards in all these science fairs. Truth is, we've seen our learners participate among the brightest kids in the world, and they walk away with awards. It's because we give them that platform to be able to showcase their innovation. These are 2017 figures. I'd like to highlight a few things here. On the right-hand side, of the 27 or 25 participants, 15 of them won overseas, starting from China, Taiwan, all the way to the west to Intel ISEF. Of the 15, 6 were PDI winners, which means that in the past, those 6 learners would never have made it through because they were not participating in these activities. And another big thing for us is 11 of the 15 were female winners. So this year we sent 5 girls to China and all of them won awards. Here we get 5 girls, showing off with their awards, surrounded by a whole lot of male counterparts. So our girls are really doing us proud. So we need to continue in this trajectory. Our international event, which you've seen at in the video, brings together over 200 judges from academia, government, private sector. We have over 30 organizations that award over 100 recipients over 5 million rand worth of prizes. This year, that figure is 14 million rand because of a lot of bursaries. And these bursaries are your full 4-year engineering type bursaries. That's about 400K. Our grand winners will win 50,000 cash or 75,000 cash, which they can use towards their studies. One of the big awards we have is by one of our partners, Siemens. They select one, preferably a female learner, and in the last 2 years, One was from rural KZN, one was from rural Mpumalanga. And they sent these female learners to Germany on a full scholarship to study mechatronics. Takes about 3.5 years, valued at about R1,000,000. Now, you heard some of these girls on the video. What we didn't hear is where one of the last kid, when he was fixing the car, it's overlooking rural Mpumalanga. And the comment he made to us was, by me winning this bursary, I'm the first person in my entire village to go to university. And I am going to change the lives of the people in my village. Now, how often we've heard many people in different areas saying, we're going to change, we're going to change. These are coming from young kids. Our young kids are telling us exactly what they need to do. It's about time we started listening to those young kids, because they are the future. If we want to predict the future, we've got to shape how our young kids think, how they work. And that is why, at that age, we have them. Many of you may have had a teenage child or two. Many of you may still have them. I'm a bit unfortunate, I still have one with me. And you know with teenagers, they know everything. You cannot tell them what's right for them. They know it all. So how do you expect that teenager to then shape his own mind, or how can we shape the mind at university? Quite often, you get to university, we have a 35% failure rate at first year level. Now panic hits them. They want to get a degree and get out of university and get a job ASAP. So what happens to our postgraduates and our researchers? We are losing. We are not getting them. At the Expo, we get them at the age where we can, let's put it, we can mold them. We can encourage them to get into research and development, get up to your PhD level, because we need scientists and engineers in this country, not just a graduate and a job. So that's the stark difference in what we do. We have to convince them at that level. So before they reach, I think the age is 15 when they know everything, between 10 and 13, maybe we can influence them there. But we start off at the primary school level, from grade 6 up to grade 12. These are lists of our sponsors and our partners. We have a lot of all universities on board, all 9 provincial departments of education, and a few private sector partners. We'd encourage, if you know of partners that want to get involved in promoting research-based project work in school, please get in touch with us. On the international coverage, we have achieved quite a bit, all the way from China or Taiwan, bottom left, to Intel ISF, bottom right. When these kids come back, they come back with such fantastic stories. So Intel ISF is the largest science fair in the world, where 1,700 of the brightest kids in the world participate from 70 countries. Some of the mind-blowing projects that I've seen that I can't believe, cancer research at school level. And these kids are winning because they produce sound research. That's the kind of stuff. Another learner she was actually investigating these volcanic rocks at the bottom of the ocean. And I'm just thinking about which teenage girl dives to the bottom of the ocean and studies rocks. But they do it. Now, while it's quite amazing as to what these kids are doing, we have a number of kids that participated at Intel ISF. Siabulila Tusa is a familiar face. He won at Intel ISF in 2007, and there's a planet named after him. He studied rocket science. He's one of the 21 icons on the continent, and he won the Harvard Scholarship coming through the program together with another young kid, Raiz, from Cape Town. And they both were very successful. Now there's a number of these seers out there. They are the diamonds in the rough. What is our job? Our job is to find those diamonds in the rough, bring them into the system, and ensure they are supported all the way through to their university level. And we need all the help we can. Or If those of you who have heard about Sia will know what a fantastic journey he's been on. So Sia came up from the Eastern Cape on an academic scholarship. His mother was a teacher. He had a few small explosions in his mother's kitchen from time to time because his project was on rocket fuel. And he didn't think it would blow up in his mother's kitchen. He won an academic scholarship, studied in Johannesburg, and that's how he got to enter the Expo, and that's how he won. He met Mark Shuttleworth, and he said that when he heard Mark Shuttleworth speaking at the science fair, he was motivated that he wants to be a rocket scientist, and he's achieved that. Sia is currently collaborating between South Africa, or commuting between South Africa and the US, and he's developing an alternate energy storage device. We normally call it a battery, but it's not a battery according to Sia, right? So that's a groundbreaking stuff these young kids are doing, coming out of our government schooling system. And the big difference is, give them the opportunities and they will perform. So where do we actually start with our innovation? We start with the youth. Do we start at teens, undergrads? What is a correct inflection point for our investment? Are we going to get a good return on investment? Nowhere in the world does education investment give you an ROI. You cannot measure it in that sense. So we have to invest heavily in education. We cannot compare it to a business return. And what is our end game? Where do we want to be? Do we just want to go with the flow, or do we have a game plan in place? Because our learners have their minds made up. They are going somewhere. It's up to us. How do we keep them in South Africa? And how do we keep them productive and helping us to create a better country and a better future for us all? That is a big challenge. And I have no answers for that. But I am surrounded by all you bright delegates here, and I'm hoping that we could get this message out there. And come a few years' time, we could see our learners now engaging. And Prof, they may probably change the name of the revolution, and we'd welcome that. I'd like to thank you for your patience and your attention, and that's my presentation to you. Thank you.